Well, that wing is ready for recover now. Everything is done to it that can be done to it, that needs to be done to it before I put the fabric on it. I've just been going through a few last minute preps. I went over the whole thing again with Prep-Sol, clean it, make sure there's no fingerprints or oil or anything, dirt or anything like that on any of the surfaces. And I had a couple of drips in the paint, mainly on that inboard flap false bar. There was a pretty good drip on it in one little spot, and then I had a couple other little teeny ones, I think on the next flap false bar, the outboard flap false bar, and a couple little rough spots on one of the leading edges. So I got some sandpaper and sanded those down smooth. And I had the same thing over here on this wingtip bow. I had a few drips on it, coated that pretty heavy with that varnish when I was doing it, and of course it had a rough finish on it anyway, so I went over it with some sandpaper, cleaned those drips up and stuff, and cleaned the rough stuff off of it. I don't know why I'm so anal on that, but I keep hearing that voice on the tape, the DVD that I have, showing how to cover, that if you feel it you will see it. So if I feel a rough spot on there, I want to knock it down. So anyway, I've got that pretty well smoothed up, and then the last thing I did, there's two wires there that go through that wingtip bow for the nav light. One of them is the power wire and the other one goes to ground. Well, you can't have those sticking through that wingtip bow when you're covering it, so we need some way to fish that out. Anyway, I just stripped off about a half an inch or something like that off the end of those two wires, twisted them together, and then took a real thin piece of safety wire and soldered onto that, doubled it over and stuck it through that hole. So once I get done with the cover and get ready to hook the nav lights up, I can open that hole up and then reach in there with a hook and pull that wire out of there. So that's about it. I've got everything done that I need to do on here, and I can start covering. No more procrastination. Got a load of sand coming today for the septic system and kind of waiting for it. We got another nice day today, although it's chilly out there today. It's overcast. Forecast to get a little bit of rain today, and it did sprinkle a little bit. Anyway, that's on the agenda, but I figured while I was waiting for that sand and gravel to get delivered, I might as well be doing something productive. So anyway, that thing is prepped up. That's about as much as I can do to it without messing something up. I'm going to go ahead and go over this wing now and get it prepped for doing the fabric. And one of the things I've got to do is to put anti-chafe tape on any spot there that might be a sharp spot or protrusion that might rub through the fabric from the inside out. We got every place a screw sticks through as a potential chafing point, and then you've got the joints where the skins lap together, and then there's other things that stick up that might chafe through the fabric. We had a really bad chafing problem with the fabric down there on the number 5 wing skin. It was really rough and rubbed through this fabric there. I think I've got that fixed good enough where it shouldn't do that like it did before. We still go across and put anti-chafe tape on all the spots and try to figure out anything that looks like it might chafe through the fabric from the inside out. Well, I started from this outboard end on the wing tip and put them over the screws and then over the joints. I made it as far as just past the landing light so far, so I'll continue doing that. Actually, in the plans for the airplane there that I have, the original Piper drawings and stuff, they actually call for masking tape to do this with, and a lot of the guys use masking tape, and that's what this airplane had on it when I took it apart. But masking tape is just nasty on here when you go to try to take it apart. And the glue on it gets really hard and you can't get it off, and the paper tape disintegrates and it absorbs moisture and causes corrosion in spots where there might be moisture impregnating and stuff like that. So what Polyfiber recommends is anti-chafing tape, and this is anti-chafing tape here, a roll. I've used a bunch of this already. I did the whole fuselage of the airplane and the tail control surfaces, horizontal stabilizer and elevators and rudder, and then I've done one aileron and one flap. This is how much I've got left out of one roll. But this stuff is kind of funny. It's a woven fabric, cotton or something like that, tape with adhesive on it. And it reminds me a lot of the old adhesive tape that we used to have when I was young to put Band-Aids on and stuff when you had put gauze down over a wound and then it taped it up with adhesive tape. This is kind of reminds me a lot of that stuff. I'm going to take that one off and redo it. There are sharp edges here on this leading edge where it was cut out for relief around spars and stuff. And I've cleaned those up as much as I could with a file and deburred them and everything, but there's still sharp edges on that. Maybe I'll come back and do this whole leading edge here after I get done doing the, yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'll do that. Oh, well, this stuff probably transfer through the fabric when you put it on. I don't know. I didn't really notice it that much on the fuselage when I did the fuselage, but I've seen some instances where they just took this and run it over the whole leading edge here across these screws. It goes across these screws here and then down on the screws underneath. And then like this airplane, when I took it apart, it just had little dabs of masking tape over each screw. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this down like this over these screws on the top, and then I'll go over and do the ones on the bottom. Well, anyhow, that's it. We'll just keep working my way around here. Do this top side, and then I'll see if we want to flip it over and do the other side. It's getting to that time where I can start putting the fabric on the wing. Everything is all together on it. I went over it with some sandpaper and my fingers and found any drips or anything that was in the paint that I applied to it, and any rough spots. And then I went over the wing and with anti-chafing tape and taped up all the spots that might chafe through the screw heads and the joints and stuff like that between the seams on the leading edge and places on the trailing edge and whatnot. I've gone over this thing about 3 times with some acrylic clean any handprints, fingerprints, anything like that off of it. So now I'm just about screwed up my nerve enough to start covering. I've got a videotape, a DVD that Polyfiber put out years ago on applying the Polyfiber system, and I've been watching it, but I just dug out the Bible here. This is the Bible on the Polyfiber system. AC 4313 has a lot of good stuff in it, information on it on fabric covering and stuff, and it's got some limits and things like that on it. But the Polyfiber system is its own system, and this is basically the Bible for the Polyfiber system on how to put it on and everything. So I've just been going through it. It's been a few years since I've done this, so I've been going through it and checking everything out on it. One of the things they say in here that they didn't mention on the video was that they want you to go over, let me see, where does it say here? Anyway, they want you to go over all the metal surfaces with some poly brush. Oh, here it is. First, the leading edge. Mix up some thinned poly brush, 3 parts poly brush to 1 part Polyfiber reducer, and brush 2 coats of this thinned poly brush onto the leading edge to provide a bedding. We do that with the trailing edge too. So anyway, that's the first thing I'm going to do is put a bedding of poly brush on the leading edge and on the false bars back there too, so that the fabric will be bedded into that. Any place that the fabric is going to be attached to the metal. Well, like I said, that's the first step, and then we got plenty of other steps after that. This is kind of a generic way to do it, but they want a minimum of 2-inch overlap on the leading edge and a 1-inch overlap on any other seams that they have anywhere else. So unless we had an envelope, and I don't have an envelope, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it 2 parts. You lay 1 part on the top of the wing, glue it down to the leading edge and the trailing edge, and then 1 part on the bottom of the wing, again glued down to the trailing edge and leading edge. Now I gotta wait for that prep sol to evaporate before I put the poly brush on there. Well, here's a gallon can of poly brush, and this must be a new can because it's pretty well mixed up. You can see it has kind of an orangey, turns into a pink color when it's out on the fabric. It's basically, well, it's not basically, it's exactly the same stuff as the other poly fiber products that go on. The poly tack, poly spray, poly brush, and even the polytone are all exactly the same stuff. It's liquefied vinyl, just like the vinyl in a beach ball or a cheap raincoat or the dashboard of cars and stuff like that. I don't know whether vinyl is still a dashboard of a car or not, but anyway, that's what it is liquefied vinyl. Vinyl held, melded with a solvent. And an MEK is the universal solvent for this stuff, but they don't recommend using it for thinning this. They say it's too harsh, so they've got their own special thinner for that. But this is the poly brush, and it has the pink dye in it. That's what makes it different from the other stuff, is it has pink dye in it. And the reason for that is so that you can see it when it goes on. It's kind of like a telltale when it goes on the fabric, so you know that it's on the fabric. Poly tack is a little thicker and it's clear, doesn't have any color or anything to it. Poly brush has the pink in it. Poly spray is exactly the same stuff, but it has aluminum, real fine aluminum particles in it to make it silver color, and that's to help with the UV so that it doesn't get broke down in the UV. And then of course polytone is the same stuff, but it just has whatever dyes on it or whatever to make the finished color, whether it's yellow or white or blue or green or whatever. But anyway, it's exactly the same stuff. So when you use them, they go on liquid like that, and the solvents in them will actually bond them to the underlying layer, so they become one layer. The poly brush goes on the fabric after it's glued on, and the idea on there is it's thin, and so it will go through the weave of the fabric to the underside of it and bond so that it makes a universal coat, kind of like a raincoat or something, so that it goes through on both sides. Well, I've got a little bit of poly brush left over from when I did the airframe. I was just looking at it to see if I could use it, and it's pretty stiff in there. Its solvent has evaporated. I put some MEK in it to see if I could get it to loosen up, but it might not be any good. They say to reduce this 2 to 1, I'll have to get something to open that up. So I'll put some, here's 2 to 1 on my cup. I got a quart cup there. Not going to use that much, I don't think. Okay, there's 4 parts. Okay. Now we need to go to 4. This is going to make a lot more poly brush than I probably need. It's not a catalyst or anything, it's just a thinner, so it doesn't need any dwell time or anything like that to activate it, or reactivate it, or react it, or whatever term you want to use. Nice new brush. I'll go start painting this stuff on the metal surfaces on the wing. Now they want 2 coats. They say to put 2 coats of this on here, thin like this. Alright, I got that done. So then, since this is not a catalyzed product, it's just thinned, it's not catalyzed, I can go ahead and dump this back in there. Now I've got plenty of brushes and plenty of these mixing cups now, but I'm going to go ahead and Actually, the brushes are probably cheaper than the MEK. I got at least one coat, in some places 2 coats of the poly brush on every place that there's metal that the fabric's going to run over. Well, that's good enough. We'll let that stuff cure on there, and then the next step will be to start putting some fabric on. But I'll let that cure up first.